My name is Anna. I'm 32 years old, and last Tuesday my boss deleted a year of my life's work right in front of me. He looked me dead in the eye, with that smug little smirk he always wore, and said, "This server isn't compliant with our new cloud-first initiative. You'll have to start over." The project, the one that was supposed to save the company millions, the one I had poured every late night and weekend into, was gone. Just an empty directory and a cursor blinking back at me. He expected me to cry, to beg, to panic, but something else happened instead. And if you stick around, I'll tell you the whole story of how that single catastrophic keystroke led to his complete ruin and my ultimate revenge. And now, please, stop the video and subscribe to our channel. To be able to keep making videos like this, we need to reach 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. Thank you. When I first started at Innovate Logistics 5 years ago, it was a different world. The company was smaller, scrappier, and it felt like a family. My title was Systems Analyst. But in reality, I was the digital janitor, the architect, and the emergency surgeon, all rolled into one. The existing systems were a patchwork of outdated software and convoluted spreadsheets, held together by hope and the sheer force of will of the people using them. I loved it. I saw it not as a mess, but as a massive, beautiful puzzle, just waiting for someone to solve it. My first project was to untangle the order-to-cash process, a system so broken that invoices were regularly lost for months, costing the company a small fortune. I spent 3 months buried in code nobody had looked at since 2008, interviewing frustrated accounting clerks and mapping out every single point of failure. I built a new, streamlined process from scratch. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. It reduced invoicing errors by 95% in the first quarter alone. No one threw a parade, but the head of accounting, a lovely older woman named Carol, brought me a box of homemade cookies and told me I was a miracle worker. For me, at 27, that was better than any bonus. That success became my calling card. Whenever something digital was broken, inefficient, or just plain impossible, the call would go out, "Get Anna." I became the company's foundation. I built the inventory tracking system, the customer relationship management database, the internal communications portal. Each one was my baby, a complex machine that I understood down to the last line of code. I didn't mind the long hours or the weekend emergencies. I thrived on the challenge, on being the person who could fix anything. I genuinely believed that my dedication and the quality of my work were all that mattered. I thought meritocracy was a real thing, not just a word they put in the employee handbook. I was loyal, deeply and foolishly loyal. I turned down 2 other job offers during that time because I felt a sense of ownership, of responsibility. I was holding the entire digital infrastructure of Innovate Logistics together, and I was proud of it. The company was growing fast, and I felt like I was growing with it. I was naive, wasn't I? I thought that competence was a shield. I didn't realize that in the corporate world, sometimes the brightest lights just create the darkest shadows for insecure people to hide in. And my shadow was about to get very, very dark. His name was Richard, and he arrived like a storm front, all bluster and expensive cologne. He was hired 2 years after I started, brought in from some massive, soulless conglomerate to be our new Director of Technology Operations. He had an MBA from a fancy school, and a vocabulary that was 90% buzzwords. On his first day, he called an all-hands meeting and talked for an hour about synergizing our core competencies, leveraging disruptive paradigms, and ideating next-gen value propositions. I remember looking around at my colleagues, the ones who actually kept the servers running, and seeing a sea of blank, confused faces. My first direct interaction with him was a week later. I had just finished a major migration of our client data to a more secure server, a project I'd worked on for 2 months straight. In the executive weekly meeting, Richard presented my work as his own. He used a few of my slides, but he'd replaced my name with his. I was sitting in the back of the room, as I was only invited to be on standby for any deep technical questions. When the CEO praised the seamless transition, Richard just smiled and said, "Thank you. My team and I are focused on delivering excellence." My team. I was the entire team. I felt a hot spike of anger in my chest, but I said nothing. What could I say? I was a systems analyst. He was a director. I told myself it was for the good of the department. I tried to handle it professionally. I scheduled a meeting with him and tried to explain that I felt it was important for the executives to know who was actually doing the work. He just leaned back in his chair, a condescending smirk playing on his lips, and told me, "Anna, in a corporate environment, it's not about individual heroes. It's about the team. And I'm the leader of this team. The credit reflects on all of us." He had this way of talking to me, of saying my name like it was a piece of food he'd found in his teeth. From that day on, a pattern emerged. He would forget to invite me to planning meetings for my own projects. He would ask me to email him detailed summaries of my progress, which he would then forward to his superiors under his own name. The colleagues who had once come to me for everything started to become more distant. They saw what was happening. They saw how he belittled my suggestions in public meetings, only to repropose them as his own idea a week later. They saw, but they were afraid. He had hiring and firing power. I tried talking to his boss, the CTO, but Richard had already worked his magic. He had positioned himself as the brilliant strategist and me as the difficult but talented technician who needed firm management. The CTO just told me to trust the process and try to be more of a team player. I was being gaslit by the entire management chain, and my belief in meritocracy was starting to crumble, piece by painful piece. The idea for Project Chimera was born out of desperation and a flash of late-night inspiration. Innovate Logistics had a massive problem. Our 3 core operational systems, inventory, shipping and client management, were completely separate. They didn't talk to each other. This meant that to get a full picture of a single client's activity, you needed 3 different people to pull 3 different reports, which then had to be manually collated on a spreadsheet. It was incredibly inefficient and led to costly errors. My solution was ambitious. A single, unified database. A central nervous system for the entire company that would integrate everything. One source of truth. I spent a month of my own time after hours building a proof of concept. I mapped out the architecture, calculated the potential cost savings, which were in the millions annually, and prepared a detailed proposal. I presented it to the CTO. He was blown away. This, he said, was the kind of forward-thinking initiative the company needed. And then he said the words that made my heart sink into my shoes. "This is a major strategic initiative. It needs a director-level owner. I'm putting Richard in charge of it." I wanted to scream. I wanted to lay out the 2 years of evidence I had that Richard couldn't manage his way out of a paper bag. But I didn't. I just nodded. I still believed, foolishly, that the work would speak for itself. If I built something brilliant, my contribution would be undeniable, regardless of who was nominally in charge. So I dove in. For the next year, Project Chimera was my entire life. I was the sole architect, designer, and coder. I worked 12, sometimes 14-hour days. I ate dinner at my desk so often that the night janitor knew my favourite takeout order. I was building a masterpiece. It was complex, elegant, and powerful. It was the best work I had ever done. Richard's contribution to this monumental effort consisted of scheduling a weekly synergy meeting. In these meetings, he would sit at the head of the table, stare at the progress charts he'd had me prepare, and ask profound questions like, are we optimizing our workflow for maximum impact? Or my personal favourite, how can we make this more cloudy? He didn't understand a single line of code, a single database schema, a single API call. His ignorance was a living, breathing thing in the room. I remember one particular incident. He had insisted, based on an article he'd read in an in-flight magazine, that we needed to de-silo our data streams. He didn't know what that meant, and neither did I, in the context of what I was building. but he insisted. He came over to my desk, physically took my mouse, and started clicking around in the database admin tool, trying to link two tables he thought should be linked. He was about to execute a command that would have corrupted the entire customer dataset. I saw what he was doing and managed to shout, "Stop!" just as his finger was coming down on the enter key. I had to spend the entire weekend meticulously rebuilding the index he had damaged. I never told anyone. I just cleaned up his mess. Another invisible act of loyalty to a company that was letting a fool jeopardize its future. As Project Chimera neared completion, something in Richard shifted. His useless meddling transformed into active sabotage. I think he finally started to understand that he was completely irrelevant to the project's success, and that its completion would expose him as the fraud he was. The closer I got to the finish line, the more threatened he became, and the more he escalated his campaign of petty tyranny. The weekly synergy meetings became daily ordeals. He started demanding reports, not just on progress, but on my minute-by-minute activity. He wanted a detailed breakdown of my time in 15-minute increments, submitted in a convoluted Excel template he designed himself. It was a deliberate, malicious waste of my time, a task designed to take 2 hours out of my day that could have been spent actually finishing the project. Then he started attacking me in public. In team meetings with my colleagues, the witnesses, sitting right there, he would publicly question my design choices. "Anna," he'd say in front of everyone, "I'm looking at this module here. It seems overly complex. Are you sure this is the most efficient approach? My experience at Globocorp taught me that simplicity is key." He didn't know what the module did, of course. He was just reading the name off a diagram. I would have to patiently explain, in simple terms, why the complexity was necessary to handle our specific business logic. The most humiliating moment came during a pre-briefing for the CTO. Richard was supposed to be walking him through the high-level architecture of Project Chimera. He put a diagram I had made up on the screen, but he'd somehow managed to put it up upside down. He didn't notice. He started pointing at the database icons, which were now at the top of the screen, and calling them user-facing input nodes. He was talking complete, unadulterated nonsense. The CTO looked confused. My colleagues, my silent, terrified colleagues, were staring intently at their notepads, at the floor, anywhere but at the screen. I felt a flush of second-hand embarrassment so intense it was dizzying. I had a choice. Let him continue to make an absolute fool of himself and potentially sink the project, or correct him and face his wrath. I chose the latter. "Richard," I said, as gently as I could, "I think that slide might be inverted." He stopped. He stared at the screen, then at me. A dark, ugly red blush crept up his neck. He mumbled something about the projector being set up wrong and quickly moved to the next slide. He didn't speak to me for the rest of the day, but the look he gave me was pure poison. It was then that he started dropping his new favourite words into conversations with other managers. Standardization, compliance, corporate procedure. He was building a case, laying a trap. He was arguing that my work, the work that was about to save the company millions, was a rogue operation, a threat to his newly invented standards. And I was walking right into his trap, too focused on the finish line to see the knife he was sharpening for my back. The final week was a blur of frenzied activity. Project Chimera was 99% complete. I had ironed out the last few bugs, optimized the query performance until it was lightning fast, and was preparing for the final, full demonstration to the entire executive board, scheduled for the following Wednesday. This was it. This was the moment that would validate a year of sleepless nights and sacrifice. I felt a nervous, bubbling excitement. No matter how much Richard had tried to obstruct me, the work was done. It was brilliant, it was undeniable. He couldn't take credit for this, not really. When they saw what it could do, when they saw the live data flowing seamlessly, when they saw years of inefficiency melt away in a single click, they would have to know. They would have to recognise who had actually built it. Richard, however, was a ghost. He barely spoke to me, communicating only through curt emails with vague, ominous subject lines like upcoming strategic realignment and compliance review. He was spending a lot of time in closed-door meetings with people from HR and the Chief Information Security Officer. I should have been more concerned, but I was too busy polishing my masterpiece. I thought he was just posturing, trying to look important in the run-up to the big reveal. I remember him walking past my desk, a thin, satisfied smile on his face, and saying, "Big day next week, Anna. Make sure you're prepared to speak to the project's adherence to the new cloud-first framework." I had no idea what he was talking about. There was no new cloud-first framework. It was something he had completely invented. I just nodded and said, "Of course," and went back to my code. The night before the fateful meeting, the Tuesday, I stayed late, running one final end-to-end diagnostic. Everything was perfect. The server hummed quietly in the rack, a monolithic testament to my work. I placed my hand on the warm metal casing and felt a ridiculous surge of pride and affection. It felt like a part of me. As I packed up to leave, I looked around the empty office. The silence felt charged, different. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a productive day's end. It was the tense, heavy silence before a storm. I shrugged it off as pre-demo jitters. I walked out of that building feeling like I was on the cusp of the biggest triumph of my career, completely and utterly blind to the fact that I was not walking towards a finish line but an execution. The next morning I arrived to an email from Richard titled, "Urgent Project Chimera Review Meeting, scheduled for 10 a.m. The invite list was small. Just me, Richard, and two of the senior guys from the infrastructure team, the witnesses. I walked into the small windowless conference room feeling a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. Richard was already there, sitting at the head of the table looking incredibly pleased with himself. He didn't say good morning. He just gestured to the chair opposite him. "Anna, thanks for joining," he began, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "We need to discuss a serious compliance issue with Project Chimera." He launched into a 5-minute speech filled with his usual nonsense salad of buzzwords. He talked about unauthorized development environments, non-standard server provisioning, and a critical failure to adhere to the company's new cloud-first strategic imperative. This was the framework he'd invented. He was treating it like it was company gospel. He then swiveled his laptop around to face me. On the screen was the admin portal for our internal servers. My project server, the one I had just lovingly checked on last night, was highlighted. "This server," he said, his voice dropping for dramatic effect, "was provisioned outside of the approved channels. It represents a significant security and compliance risk. It is, for all intents and purposes, Shadow AT." I started to speak, to defend myself, to explain that the server was provisioned a year ago, long before his fake framework ever existed, but he held up a hand. "It doesn't matter, Anna. What matters is that we, as a department, follow procedure, and the procedure for non-compliant assets is clear." He picked up his mouse. He moved the cursor over to the Terminate Instance button. I watched it, mesmerized. It felt like time was slowing down. I could see the faces of my colleagues, their eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fear. They knew what was happening. They knew the work I had put in. But they sat there, silent as stones. He looked me right in the eye, that smug, hateful smirk spreading across his face. "This server isn't compliant with our new cloud-first initiative. You'll have to start over." And he clicked the button. A confirmation box popped up. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete this resource? This action cannot be undone." He clicked confirm without a moment's hesitation. On the screen, the server status changed from running to terminating and then to deleted. A year of my life, gone. The room was utterly silent. He expected me to shatter. He wanted tears, pleading, anger. He fed on that. But in that moment, as the reality washed over me, I felt none of that. The hurt, the frustration, the years of quiet resentment, they didn't boil over. They froze. They solidified into a single, diamond-hard point of clarity. I finally saw him for what he was, a petty, insecure little man, whose only power came from destroying things he couldn't build. And I saw the company for what it was, a place that would allow a man like that to thrive. I took a slow breath. I looked him in the eye, my expression completely calm. "Okay, Richard," I said. My voice was even, quiet. I stood up, turned, and walked out of the room, leaving him sitting there in his moment of hollow victory. I walked back to my desk, ignoring the shocked stares from the rest of the team. I didn't log into my computer. I opened my personal phone, went to my email, and pulled up a draft I'd written weeks ago, in a moment of fantasy. The recipient was Sarah Jenkins, the lead architect at Nexus Logistics, our biggest competitor. She had tried to recruit me a year earlier. The subject line was simple: "I'm available." I added one line to the body of the email: "Effective immediately." Then I hit send. It was the single most powerful and liberating keystroke of my entire life. I didn't wait for a reply. I knew it would come. I took the small cardboard box I kept under my desk for recycling and began to pack. It didn't take long. There was my favourite coffee mug, the one with a cartoon cat on it that said, "I'm silently correcting your grammar." There was a framed photo of my sister and me at the beach. There was my ergonomic keyboard and mouse, the ones I'd bought myself, because the company-issued ones were cheap and painful to use. A few technical books. That was it. 5 years of my life, and it all fit into a single flimsy box. My colleagues watched me, their faces a mixture of pity and awe. One of them, a junior developer named Kevin, came over and whispered, "Are you okay?" What he did was insane. I just smiled at him, a real, genuine smile for the first time in what felt like years. "I'm better than okay, Kevin. I'm free." As I was taping the box shut, Richard sauntered over, hands in his pockets, radiating smugness. "Don't be so dramatic, Anna," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's just a small setback. Think of it as a good learning opportunity for you. A chance to rebuild with proper oversight from the start." I didn't even look at him. I picked up my box, turned toward the exit, and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye. I could feel his confused, angry stare on my back as I badged out for the last time. The walk to my car was surreal. The air felt cleaner. The sky looked brighter. The weight of the last 2 years, a weight I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying, was just gone. I got in my car, put the box on the passenger seat, and just sat there for a minute, breathing. Then my phone buzzed. It was an email from Sarah at Nexus Logistics. The subject line was, "i.e., I'm available." The message was short. "Anna, best news I've had all year. Can you talk now?" Before I could even reply, my phone started ringing. It was her. "Please tell me you're serious," she said, her voice crackling with excitement. I told her the short version of what had just happened. There was a moment of stunned silence on her end, then she just said, "His loss is our staggering gain. Anna, the offer I made you last year is still on the table, but forget it. It's not good enough. We're launching a new strategic platform initiative, and I want you to lead it. Senior architect. You get to build your own team. And let's start the salary negotiations at 30% higher than our last offer. How does that sound?" I think I actually laughed out loud. The contrast was so stark it was almost comical. Richard's parting shot was to call his act of professional vandalism a learning opportunity for me. Sarah's first move was to offer me a staggering opportunity to lead. It sounds perfect, Sarah, I said. When can I start? I started at Nexus Logistics the very next Monday. The difference was night and day. They didn't just give me a new laptop. They asked me what my ideal machine was and ordered it. They didn't just give me a project. They gave me a budget, a headcount for 3 senior developers, and the freedom to build my vision the right way. My new boss, Sarah, was everything Richard wasn't. Brilliant, supportive, and technically fluent. Our first meeting wasn't about synergy or paradigms. It was a deep, exhilarating dive into system architecture on a whiteboard. It felt like coming home. Meanwhile, back at Innovate Logistics, the ROT was beginning to surface. The big executive demo for Project Chimera was, of course, cancelled. Richard sent out a memo explaining that the project was undergoing a strategic re-evaluation to better align with market dynamics. He promised a new, more robust version would be ready in 6 months, a timeline he pulled from thin air. For a few days, his lie held. But then the phone rang. It was Mr. Henderson, the CIO of our largest client, a massive retail chain whose contract was worth over $10 million a year. Their entire business depended on our logistics, and they had been eagerly awaiting Project Chimera, which I had personally demonstrated to them in its early stages. Mr. Henderson was calling to get a pre-demo progress update. The call, of course, went to Richard. He tried to bluff his way through it, feeding Mr. Henderson the same corporate jargon he'd used in his memo. But Mr. Henderson was sharp. He'd been in the industry for 30 years and could smell nonsense from a mile away. After a few minutes of evasive answers, he cut to the chase. "Richard, this all sounds very vague," he said. "Can you just put Anna on the phone? She can give me the real technical rundown in 5 minutes." There was a long, damning silence. I heard about this part later from Kevin, the junior dev, who was on the call taking notes. Richard had to finally admit the truth. "Ah," he said, his voice suddenly losing all its bluster. "Anna is no longer with the company." Mr. Henderson was furious. "What do you mean she's no longer with the company? She's the only one over there who knows how our systems work." The entire Chimera project was her brainchild. Richard tried to reassure him that everything was under control, but the damage was done. Mr. Henderson ended the call by saying, "You have 30 days to present me with a viable working demonstration of a replacement for Chimera. Not a plan, not a promise. A working demo. If you can't, we're invoking the termination for cause clause in our contract." The moment he hung up, absolute panic erupted at Innovate. They finally understood. I wasn't just a cog in the machine. I was the engineer who had built the whole damn machine. And they had just let a fool throw me in the trash. The call from my old company came a week later. I was in the middle of a brainstorming session with my new team at Nexus, whiteboarding what we were calling Project Phoenix, the spiritual successor to Chimera, but bigger, better, and properly funded. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. "Hello?" I said. "Anna? It's Catherine Bishop." It was the COO of Innovate Logistics, a woman I had once admired immensely, a sharp, no-nonsense executive, who I always thought was one of the good ones. Her voice, usually so composed and powerful, was tight with desperation. "Anna, I'm so sorry," she began. "I'm not going to make excuses. What happened was unacceptable. We made a catastrophic mistake." I stayed silent, letting her talk. "Richard has been terminated," she said. "His actions were inexcusable and not representative of this company." The satisfaction I felt in that moment was a deep, warm, and quiet thing. It wasn't triumphant or loud. It was the simple, clean feeling of a balanced equation. "We need you back, Anna," she continued, her voice pleading. "The Henderson account is on the line. But it's more than that. You are a vital part of this company. We know that now. We want to make it right. You can write your own ticket. We'll create a new role for you, principal architect. You'll report directly to the CTO. We'll double your previous salary. Name your price. Just please, come back and fix this. 2 weeks ago, that offer would have been the validation I had craved for years. It was everything I had ever wanted. The title, the money, the respect. But hearing it now, it felt like nothing. It was a bribe born of panic, not genuine appreciation. They didn't value me. They valued what I could do for them in a crisis. "Catherine," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I appreciate the offer, I really do. But I'm afraid I have to decline." I could hear her sharp intake of breath. "I've accepted a position at another company." "Where?" she asked, a note of dread in her voice. "Nexus Logistics," I said, and enjoyed the long dead silence on the other end of the line. She knew what that meant. Nexus was their fiercest competitor. "I'm leading a new platform development team here," I continued, twisting the knife just a little. "It's a fantastic opportunity. In fact, we're already in preliminary talks with a major new client in the retail logistics space. Someone who is apparently very dissatisfied with their current provider and is looking for a more innovative and stable partner." I didn't have to say the name Henderson. She knew. I heard a sound that might have been a quiet sob, or just a sigh of complete and utter defeat. "I see," she whispered. "Well, I wish you the best of luck, Anna." I knew what she was thinking. They hadn't just lost an employee. They had armed their biggest rival with the one person who could dismantle their business from the outside. It's been 6 months since I walked out of Innovate Logistics with my life in a cardboard box. 6 months since Richard's single, arrogant keystroke set my real career in motion. Here at Nexus, Project Phoenix went from a whiteboard concept to a fully deployed platform in record time. With a supportive team, a real budget, and management that trusted me, I was able to build something that made Chimera look like a prototype. It's faster, more scalable, and more powerful than I ever could have managed on my own at the old place. It's the kind of work you can only do when you're empowered, not just permitted. 2 months ago, we officially signed Mr. Henderson's company. It was the biggest contract in Nexus's history. Mr. Henderson himself came to the signing, shook my hand and said, "We don't invest in companies, Anna. We invest in people. We're glad we found you again." That felt better than any revenge. As for Innovate Logistics, the fallout was exactly what you'd expect. They lost the Henderson contract, which represented about 20% of their annual revenue. The loss was so significant they had to announce it to their investors, and their stock price tumbled. They had to lay off nearly the entire division that had supported that contract, about 15 people in total. I heard from Kevin that the atmosphere there is bleak. A place that was once scrappy and fun is now just a place of fear and regret. And Richard? The grapevine is a powerful thing. The story of what he did, and the $10 million consequence, made the rounds in our relatively small industry. The last I heard, he was still exploring opportunities, which is a polite way of saying no one will touch him. In the end, this was never really about revenge. I don't celebrate their failure. What I celebrate is my own success. The real victory wasn't watching Richard fall. It was watching myself rise. For years, I had tethered my self-worth to their validation. I worked myself to the bone, hoping that one day they would turn around and say, "We see you. We value you." But that day never came. The most important lesson I learned is that you cannot wait for someone else to determine your value. Your worth is not a number in a payroll system or a title on a business card. It's inherent. It's in your skills, your knowledge, your integrity, and your resilience. The moment Richard deleted my work, he didn't destroy my value. He just severed the chain that was holding me to a place that refused to recognize it. He set me free. If you're in a situation like that where you know you're being undervalued or disrespected, please don't wait for a dramatic, catastrophic moment to make a change. You don't need someone to burn your world down for you to find the courage to build a new one. Your moment of clarity can be a quiet decision you make for yourself. Today. Trust me, the best revenge isn't watching them fail. It's not even about them at all. It's about building your own success so completely that you barely have time to look back.